Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Lisa Partida. I'm with Home Again LA. We're a nonprofit organization located out of Burbank. We provide homeless services to families at risk of homelessness and also families who are homeless. Just wanted to clarify, our organization does not provide legal aid. That will be Housing Rights Center, who is going to be presenting tonight. And I thank Elana Eden for presenting tonight's workshop that will be based on the basics of renting. So I'll pass it on to Elana, sorry.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Elana with the Housing Rights Center. I'm the Director of Media Outreach and Education here. And just as Lisa was saying, today we're going to talk about the basics of renting. So we're going to be talking about security deposits, leases, things like this that are important to just have a good foundation when you are a renter, and how to deal with the issues that might come up in your rental housing. So before we get into all of that, I do just want to introduce the Housing Rights Center for those who may not be familiar with us. We are a fair housing organization, which means that our focus is really on combating discrimination in housing and making sure that people have equal access to housing. The Fair Housing Act is the law that gives us the right to equal housing in the U.S. And we have been doing this work ever since it became the law in 1968. So we serve almost all of Los Angeles County, as well as also Ventura County, and our services are free. They are available in multiple languages. And one of our major services is housing counseling. So just giving people legal information, resources, maybe other referrals on all the different types of housing issues that might come up between tenants and landlords. And that is we offer this to both tenants and landlords. And again, in many different languages. And these are all confidential conversations that you'd be having with someone who is trained to answer questions about the law and housing. So we have a phone line for housing counseling, which we do staff live during the day, but we also get a lot of calls. So if you do reach our voicemail, just go ahead and leave your callback number and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. You can also send us an email at info@housingrightscenter.org. And we also do have appointments that we're offering while our offices are closed. So you can do a phone or a Zoom appointment, either one. They do fill up pretty quickly. So if you need a more urgent answer, I recommend the email or the phone line instead. But we want to make sure that people have a way to get in touch with us. When our counselors hear about something that might be discrimination, and I have to say that a lot of times people don't realize that what they're experiencing is actually discrimination and is illegal. But fortunately, our counselors are trained to screen for that. And if that does happen, we can often take a case and do a little bit more in that case, where we can advocate for the person experiencing discrimination. Maybe we can mediate, or even in some cases, go to court if we need to. A really common thing that we help with is disability-related issues, especially requests for accommodations in housing. But there are so many different things that could fall under this category. And if you join us again next week, we will talk much more about fair housing and the protections for families with children, protections for people who are living, sorry, I'm trying to think of another good example. Protections for people with vouchers, protections for all kinds of different situations. So I highly encourage people to come next week again. In addition to different types of workshops that we do, we also put out rental listings. And our rental listing is called Project Place. You can find it on our website. You can also get it delivered to your email every month. We do have our July listing out now as well on our website. There's a lot of good stuff there, and you can also sign up for more of our workshops on different topics. So please do check out our website. All right, so I want to start, I think that brings me nicely to talking about the very first step in the sort of basics for renting, which is finding listings, places to even apply. And I want to flag that these should really be free. You should not have to pay for apartment listings. If someone does want you to pay, it may very well be a scam. There are enough free resources available. In the city of Burbank, the Burbank Housing Corporation is one of the providers of affordable housing. The city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles also have housing search websites available. And of course, we have Project Place, as I mentioned, which covers LA County and also Ventura County, where we also work. And there's also a website called affordablehousing.com that will search really anywhere in the US for affordable housing. So these are just some of the free resources out there. I'm sure that there are more, but these are some of the big ones and some of the ones for this area. So let's say that you have found a place that you're interested in applying to. I want to speak first for a moment about Section 8. And not only Section 8, but also this protection in California based on source of income. And what this says is that where the tenant gets their income from, assuming it's something legal, we're not talking about organized crime here, right? But if it's public assistance, if it's a part-time job or a job that pays in cash, whatever it may be, right? That cannot be the basis to reject that person or to really have any different standards for them. A landlord, a property owner cannot screen based on things like Section 8 or other forms of assistance either. So in practice, what this means is we should never see an advertisement that says no Section 8 or we don't take Section 8. No one should be told that their application won't be accepted because you'll be paying with Section 8 or another voucher or whatever it may be. No one should have more criteria or more hoops to jump through or a higher rent quoted to them because of Section 8 or another non-traditional, so to speak, source of income. There may still be other criteria in the application that the tenant has to meet, but if there is an income standard, something like 2 times the rent, 3 times the rent, right? That has to be applied to the tenant's portion of the rent only. So what does that mean? I have a little scenario here, and I would love if people would share in the chat, if you can, what you think here. So here's our scenario. Joey makes $300 a month from his job. He has a voucher that will pay $900 a month. He applies for an apartment where the rent is $1,000, but the application says that tenants have to have an income of 3 times the rent. So does Joey meet the income requirement? That's our question with these facts. Okay, I see one yes. Any other answers?
I actually just wanted to state that I was actually looking for housing this week, and I came across somebody who told me that exact same thing, and I just didn't know what to say. I was at a loss for words.
Section 8?
Yeah, and it's for somebody who's receiving Section 8, and we're trying to find them housing. So
yeah, it's very common. But for the most part, it is not legal in California. So with our set of facts here.
Oh, I guess it's all Section 8.
Sorry? I didn't catch your question. I'm sorry.
Heather?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I wasn't on mute.
Okay.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, if everyone could just go ahead and mute themselves. And we will talk about much more than Section 8, but I just wanted to bring this up in the beginning to make things very clear. So the answer to this question, as I think it was Jill who said, is yes, right? With an income of $300, Joey meets the requirement because the standard for 3 times the rent can only be applied to the rent that Joey is going to pay. And the voucher is paying all but $100 of the rent. So Joey's going to be responsible for paying $100. And Joey's income is 3 times $100. It's $300. So that is how it is supposed to work, right? Joey should never be told that he has to make $3,000 because he doesn't have to cover what the voucher is covering. That would defeat the whole point, right? So I just want to make that piece clear. When you are applying, there's going to be many different application questions. And I wanted to talk about a couple that have to do with fair housing concerns. So can they ask about my income? Yes, they can. And as we just saw, there can be an income requirement as long as the Section 8 or the other assistance is appropriately accounted for. They can also ask about credit, and they may want to check credit using a social security number. But if you don't have a social security number, they have to accept some other alternative form of documentation of your financial history, something that will show them that you'll be able to pay the rent on time, that you have a track record like this. If they didn't accept something else and they only accepted a social security number, we would have a problem because they would be discriminating based on immigration status or citizenship status. They can also ask about where you've lived before, and they might want to contact your previous landlords, just like a job reference. How about criminal history? So an application can ask about criminal history, but it must be considered only on a case-by-case basis. So it should never say something like, no one with a record should apply or will be accepted, right? You have to have a chance to explain your own situation, and what they really should be looking for is if there's a safety concern. So you can imagine that a lot of criminal history is not going to be a safety concern, right? So it shouldn't then be relevant to the application. You still should report it on the application, but it shouldn't be used to screen you out as long as that's not the case. How about family or kids? This one is a no. They can ask how many people will be living in the unit, and they can have a limit, and they probably should have a limit on that. But they cannot make decisions based on how you're related to those people, if you're family, if you're married, if you're unmarried, etc. And if there are children, that should not be a factor. And they also shouldn't be asking how old the children are. This is because family status is a protected class under fair housing laws, which means that households with children are supposed to be considered the same as households without children, and are supposed to have equal access, and it's not supposed to be a factor in your application or in your terms, your rent, etc. It is normal to expect that when you're applying for a rental, you might have to pay some fees in that process. The most common one is going to be an application fee, which is essentially a credit check fee. That's what it is, even though they might call it an application fee. This fee is not supposed to be more than the actual cost of running the credit check. And there is a maximum that gets updated every year. It's usually about $50. And you should be able to keep that credit report. You should get a receipt. And maybe you already have a current credit report that they'll take instead and save you that money. That's a possibility as well. Another charge that might come up is a holding deposit. If you want the unit, but you can't move in right away, the landlord may say, well, if you give me a deposit, I will reserve it for you and I won't rent it to anyone else during that time. It will just sit empty until you're ready to move in, right? So because of that word deposit, that means this is not a permanent payment. This is something that should be either returned to you once you move in or go toward your first month's rent or fees. Again, if you move in. If you don't move in, right, if you end up not going through with it, then you will lose the deposit in almost all cases. And again, get a receipt and get all those terms included. Are they going to refund it to you or is it going to go toward your rent? You're going to hear me talk a lot about getting things in writing, getting a receipt, getting a copy. That is very important as a renter. We often will tell people as soon as you start applying, just start a folder, just throw every piece of paper that you get in that folder and keep it in case you need it later. I'll talk more about that. Before you sign a lease, so we have gone through looking for listings, applying, perhaps finding a place that you're interested in. And now let's say that you've picked a place and you want to sign the lease and get in there. The lease is very important. These are going to be the rules for as long as you live there unless something changes officially. So you need to make sure that your lease includes all the important information, starting with just the basics, your name, the landlord's name, how to contact the landlord. You're entitled to that information and you may need it, so you want to make sure it's there. It should also say when the contract is going to start, when you're going to move in and start paying rent, and when it's going to end. How long is this lease agreement for? Are you going to reevaluate it with the landlord every single month, every single week, or maybe just once a year, right? As long as it is active, it's locked in place. The terms cannot change. Once the end of the contract comes, you may want to renew if you want to stay there. And that would also be an opportunity for some of the lease terms to possibly change while you're renegotiating a contract. But in California, let's say you have a 1-year lease. That's very common, right? If 1 year comes and goes and you don't say to the landlord, I'm moving out, and the landlord doesn't say to you, I want you to move out, and you don't renew, nobody does anything, right? The year comes and goes. The lease will automatically become month to month, which means again that every month is an opportunity for things to potentially change, like a rent increase, for example. Not that a rent increase can be given every month, but it would need to be given sort of on this cycle of the contract. And what if you have to move out before the lease ends, right? In general, the landlord has to look for a replacement tenant to take over your lease. But if they can't find one, you will probably be on the hook for the rest of the rent that you agreed to pay on your lease that you're now potentially breaking. There's some exceptions. There's a special protection for people who are moving because of domestic violence or other similar situations. But in general, this is how it's going to work. So you have to be prepared that you're signing this contract, both of you are, and agreeing to those terms. So the lease should also include the rent. How much is the rent? When is the rent due each month? And when is the rent late each month, which may not be the same? If it is late, is there a late fee? Sometimes I hear about very high late fees. A late fee is not supposed to be a punishment. It is just supposed to cover the inconvenience of not getting the money on time for the landlord. So it has to be a reasonable amount. And sometimes if you ask, you may even be able to get it waived. There might also be a fee for a bounce check as well. How should rent be paid, right? Cash cannot be required. Cash cannot be required. And sometimes we also see like an online portal where you go and pay your rent online. They do have to have an option to pay rent that is not cash and also not online. So for example, a check, a money order, some kind of piece of paper has to be an option as well. And of course, the security deposit. So again, as a deposit, this means that if all goes well, you're supposed to get this money back. So this security deposit is for the landlord to hold on to as long as you live there, in case there's any damage that you or your household causes in the unit. And the security deposit, you pay it up front. It cannot be more than 2 times the rent for an unfurnished unit. And again, cash cannot be required. So once you move out, if there was damage that you or your household caused, the landlord can take those costs out of your deposit and give you back the rest. If there's no damage, they should probably give back all of it or almost all of it. All right, a couple more things to consider in the lease. Is there rent control? It is so important to know if you have rent control. In the city of Burbank, you would not, but in many other parts of the county, especially in LA, you might. And what that does is it gives you protections against large rent increases and certain evictions. So you really want to know if you have it, and they have to tell you. Is there parking in this area? That is a big question. If there is parking, is it included in your rent or does it cost extra? Are the spaces assigned or are they first come, first serve? We get so many questions with conflicts and confusion about parking. Most likely that information is going to be in the lease. And it should be so that you know how to handle it if it comes up. How many people are allowed to live in the unit, right? In general, the rule of thumb is that for every bedroom that the apartment or the place has, there should be 2 people allowed, plus 1 extra at the end of all that. So if there's a 2-bedroom, 2 per bedroom would give us 4, plus 1 more would give us 5. That's a general rule of thumb. You may want to know the terms about subletters or roommates and how those agreements are supposed to work in this particular unit. Is smoking allowed? Right? Are pets allowed? And for the moment, I'm just talking about pets, but service animals and support animals, those are a different story. Even if there is a no pet policy, animals that are to assist with a disability have to be allowed, and they cannot be charged pet rent or a pet deposit like a regular pet could be. All right. So just some final tips for the lease. Get it all in writing, get it all in black and white. Make sure you understand your lease before you sign it. And you actually have the right in California to read your lease in your primary language. If your primary language is Spanish, Chinese, Tagalog, Vietnamese, or Korean, you have the right to either bring an interpreter with you when you're going to be talking about the lease and signing it, or you can actually request a translated copy under California law. And I know everybody who's here, you're following along with this presentation in English, but you may be able to be this person for someone else as well. Keep a copy of your lease, please. You are entitled to a copy, and think about all of the questions that we just went over that are supposed to be in the lease. At some point or other, you're going to have a question, you're going to have an issue, and the answer is very likely to be in your lease. Lastly, consider rental insurance. Some leases will require renter's insurance. Not all of them do, but it can still be a good idea because it is to protect your property if something happens in the unit. And it could potentially protect against claims of negligence when something does happen. I will just add too, renter's insurance is different from whatever insurance the landlord has. So make sure to get your own insurance if you're going to be getting renter's insurance. Some of these plans are pretty cheap. I've seen $5 or $10 a month, so it's something to consider. All right, so let's say that we have now signed our lease and we're getting ready to move in. Still not quite there yet though, because before moving in, it is important to do a walkthrough. Ideally, you could do this with the landlord, but sometimes it doesn't happen that way. But you want to go through and see what's what. If you've ever rented a car, right? Maybe you take pictures of the car before you start driving while it's still in the lot, so that you can see what scratches and dings are already there, so you don't get charged for them when you return the car. It's exactly the same, right? You want to see what the state of the unit is before you ever moved in, so that later, once you do move out, you're not going to have anything deducted from your security deposit that you didn't do, that was there before you. You also just want to make sure that it's going to be fit to live in. And in California, here on the left, these are the requirements that make a rental home fit to live in. So of course it must have a full structure: floors, walls, ceiling, foundation. It must have plumbing and hot water, wiring and electricity. It must have a bathroom with a toilet and some place to wash yourself, a kitchen, heating. In California, homes must have heating. There is not currently a requirement for air conditioning, although I believe the state is considering it for whatever that's worth. There must be light and ventilation, fresh air, a window, something like this. There must be a trash receptacle, and your entrance must be able to lock. Even if you're just renting a room in someone's home, your entrance must be able to lock. You can also take this opportunity to look out for signs of things that might be troubling, like pests or rust in the tap water. You might want to look out for chipping paint, especially in an older building, because it could contain lead. Or a chipping ceiling could contain asbestos. And both of those, lead and asbestos, are harmful materials for especially long-term while you're living in the place. You could ask, when's the last time this carpet was changed? And typically the carpet should be changed about every 11 years. It's kind of a soft, it's not a hard requirement, but that's considered to be a good, in good condition and usable condition. And of course, any leaks as well. Just keep an eye out for anything that might be a concern. And then again, write it down, write a list, take pictures, and show it to the landlord. And ideally you would both sign it. Myself, I have a Google Drive with my landlord where I upload pictures whenever I have a leak, whatever it is, and I date it, right? Some system where you and the landlord have the same documents and documentation. All right, so we have finally moved into our rental home now. And I want to talk about some common issues that come up and your rights in these situations as a tenant. So for one thing, paying rent. You got to do it every month, most likely. So let's talk about it. So it is a great idea. Again, document, document, document. When you pay your rent, write in the month that the payment was for. Don't rely on the fact that it's, let's say, August 1st, and you think, oh, obviously this is my August rent. Write it in just in case. Especially, I will say, if you're dealing with any debt related to COVID-19, you definitely want to write in exactly what you're trying to pay for so that the payment gets directed to the right place. Again, cash cannot be required. An online portal also cannot be the only option. And if you do pay with cash, you are entitled to a signed receipt, and I highly recommend that you get it. In fact, I would kind of discourage people from paying with cash if possible, only because it is hard to get that documentation and even to get a receipt. You might pay and say, can I have my receipt? And the landlord says, oh yeah, I'll get it to you tomorrow, but it never comes, right? So again, you may be paying in cash for various reasons, but document as much as possible. Another thing that's likely to come up at some point, some kind of repair or some issue with the conditions and the state of things in the unit. So in general, your first step is should be to inform the landlord or the property manager, whoever it is that you're designated to communicate with. Inform them and ask for it to be fixed, again, in writing. Even if you think they already know, it is sometimes still helpful to just have a record that you did notify them on whatever date that was, and you requested repairs. Give them a chance to fix it. But, and that may be all that's needed. A lot of times it'll get fixed because of that. But if it does not, right? If the landlord refuses to do those repairs, or they just ignore the requests, or whatever it is, you do have some options to escalate this. One is to make a complaint or a report to your city and request an inspection. And the inspector can come out, take a look, and actually fine the landlord for every day that they do not fix the problem. This would be more likely for issues that impact livability, your health or safety there, or they go against the code or something like this. If there's an urgent repair, something where you cannot wait for the landlord, it has to be fixed now, you may be able to pay for that yourself, keep the receipts, and deduct the costs from your next rental payment. Again, can't emphasize enough documenting this. Tell the landlord what you're going to do in writing. Tell them once you've done it, again in writing. When you pay the rent, include a little note that says, I've deducted the costs from this repair as we discussed on such and such date. Especially when it comes to something like paying rent and not paying the whole rent or something like this, you really want to be careful to document, because you never want to be in a position where it could look like you just simply decided not to pay the rent and didn't say anything about it. That is a great recipe to get evicted, not paying the rent with no explanation. So document everything. You also may have the option to actually withhold your whole rent or maybe move out if it's really, really bad. If it's so bad that you cannot live there safely or for whatever reason, then you may be able to move out. I do recommend consulting a lawyer before doing either of those things, because again, when you're in a situation of not paying the rent or breaking the contract by moving out, you want to make sure that you're on solid footing and not, they won't be able to argue that you were wrong to do this and you would have to pay back some money. Right? When it comes to repairs in general, if the issue was caused by the tenant or someone in the household or a guest, the tenant would have to pay for that repair. But if the issue is what we call normal wear and tear, the dishwasher, the washing machine, if you have those things, whatever, the refrigerator, just stopped working because it's old, right? That happens obviously, and that's not considered the tenant's fault, and that's the landlord's responsibility. All right, another thing that comes up often is the landlord might want to come in to the property. They might want to come see it or visit for some reason. In general, they are allowed to do that within limits. Right? They may have a good reason for needing to see the property. They may want to do an annual inspection of certain issues or preventative maintenance. They may want to have a viewing if they're going to show the apartment for some reason, whatever it may be. They do have to have a reason, and they have to give notice before they enter in writing. 24 hours is usually considered reasonable, again, in writing. And I also want to point out that they should really only be coming during normal business hours. They shouldn't be coming at 10 o'clock at night, right? And they shouldn't be coming in and taking pictures of all your stuff. Really just within the limits that they might need to do to conduct their business while you're living there. So in a second, I'm going to take some questions, but before I wrap up, I did want to just leave some resources with people as well. If you need to make a complaint about the conditions in your home, about ignoring requests for repairs, or some other illegal action, harassment, illegal rent increase, whatever it may be, so Burbank has the Landlord-Tenant Commission, which meets once a month on the first Monday of the month. I believe they're still meeting virtually, and you can contact them. I have all the contact information for these different bodies here. If you're in the city of LA, the housing department can take these complaints. If you're somewhere else in the county, you may be able to go to the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. And if you do have some kind of conditions problem, like let's say mold or some kind of health or safety issue in the home, the County Department of Public Health is most likely going to be able to take that complaint. If you have questions about Section 8 or public housing or other similar types of subsidies, your local housing authority would be the place to go in Burbank. That's the Burbank Housing Authority. For much of the county, it's the LA County Development Authority. And very importantly, if for any reason you receive an eviction notice from the landlord, please do seek legal aid right away. It makes a huge difference if you can get an attorney by your side for these cases. And there is free or low cost eviction defense available through Stay Housed LA County. So stayhousedla.org is the website if you do receive a notice. And I'll just say too, an eviction is a legal process. Only a judge can evict a tenant. So if a landlord gives a notice, that is not the eviction. That does not mean that the tenant has to move. The notice from the landlord is a warning that an eviction might be filed soon. And usually there's some way to respond to the notice. You can respond and tell the landlord your reasons for why they shouldn't file the eviction, for example, in writing, right? But if they do go ahead and file regardless, then it has to go to court. So it's important that you do go through that process in order to be able to fight the eviction if that's what you want to do. But you don't have to move as soon as you receive a notice. And of course, the Housing Rights Center is also a very important resource. We're the last resource that I'm going to close on. As I mentioned, we can give information, referrals, resources on all types of issues that might come up: rent increases, evictions, repairs, harassment, discrimination, disability accommodations, etc., etc. I could go on and on. So please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions. And we can also take a couple minutes here tonight to take some questions as well. We have been recording this workshop, as you should have heard that announcement when you came in. But before we start to take questions, I think we're going to stop the recording just to give folks a chance in case you have any questions that are more sensitive and you wouldn't want, to publish. So the last thing I'll say for the benefit of the recording is, once again, if you do want to join our workshops and on different topics, fair housing, COVID-19 tenant protections, etc., please visit our website, housingrightscenter.org/register for our upcoming workshops. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Elana. So before we move on to Q&A, I just wanted to ask everybody who's on, if you guys could please enter your name and city that you guys reside in the chat. And again, thank you so much, Elana, with Housing Rights Center. I really do appreciate the time you guys are taking and working with us and presenting these workshops for the community. If you guys need any shelter services or information regarding rapid rehousing, prevention, transitional housing, or future workshops, you can also give us a call at Home Again LA. Our phone number, I'll enter it in the chat, and along with our email information as well. And I'll also be sending out a reminder for next week's fair housing workshop that Elana is also going to be presenting. So I'll go ahead and send that out to you guys, but please make sure to RSVP by sending me an email as well. So with that, I'll end it. Thank you guys. Have a good night.
Oh, so I think we can take questions.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I'm going to do. Sorry.
Yeah.
One second, just going to stop recording.